A white couple expected joy when their triplets arrived, but the babies were born with black skin. In an instant, the husband abandoned his wife. 10 years later, a shocking secret exposed the truth he had tried to bury. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's dive into the story. The air inside the maternity ward carried a sharp, sterile scent. 1. Evelyn Johnson had come to associate with anticipation, not comfort. She lay back against the hospital bed, a thin sheet drawn over her legs, her hair damp with sweat as another contraction rolled through her body. Her fingers clenched the metal side rail until her knuckles whitened. The beeping monitors, the murmurs of nurses, the faint shuffle of rubber soles on tile, everything blended into a dizzying hum. Through the haze, Evelyn caught sight of Marcus pacing across the room. His tall frame seemed restless, his hands shoved into his pockets, then out again, like he couldn't decide what to do with himself. He had worn his best button-down shirt that morning, but it was wrinkled now, his sleeves rolled to his elbows. She had teased him before labor started, telling him he looked more nervous than she felt. At the time, it drew a laugh out of him. Now, hours later, the humor was gone, replaced with a tension that filled the room as heavily as the smell of antiseptic. "Marcus," she managed between breaths, her voice trembling with fatigue, "you're going to wear a groove in that floor." He paused mid-step, offering her a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Triplets, Evelyn. 3 babies. I still can't wrap my head around it." She wanted to smile back to reassure him, but another wave of pain stole her breath. She gritted her teeth, gripping the side rail harder. He moved toward her instinctively, reaching for her hand. His palm was clammy, trembling as much as hers. For a brief moment, she felt grounded. No matter how scared they both were, they had always promised to face things together. That promise steadied her. Hours dragged on, marked only by contractions, the ticking clock on the wall, and the nurse's gentle encouragements. By the time the first shrill cry broke through the room, Evelyn was exhausted to her core. Yet when the nurse lifted a small, squirming baby and placed him into her arms, a flood of joy erased every ounce of pain. She gazed down at the tiny face. "Jordan," she whispered, naming the child they had chosen together months before. His skin was soft, his cry loud and insistent. She pressed her lips to his forehead, overwhelmed. "You're perfect." Moments later came another cry, then another, as Layla and Caleb made their entrance. The nurses worked quickly, cleaning, swaddling, and placing them in the bassinets. Evelyn turned her head to take them all in. 3 tiny bundles of life, a miracle she had longed for. Her heart swelled with a joy so big it ached. She turned toward Marcus, eager to see his wonder, to share this moment. But the look on his face wasn't wonder, it was confusion, then anger. He stood frozen, his hands limp at his sides. His eyes darted from one baby to the next, his expression hardening by the second. Evelyn's smile faltered. "Marcus?" she whispered. His voice was low, almost a growl. What is this?" She blinked, stunned. "What do you mean?" "There are babies, Marcus." "No," he snapped, shaking his head, his voice sharper now. "No, they're not. Don't you lie to me." The words pierced her. She looked back at the bassinets. Jordan's tiny chest rose and fell. Layla's little fists flailed. Caleb's lips puckered as he whimpered. They were beautiful, healthy, perfect, but Marcus's gaze wasn't on their innocence. His eyes were fixed on their skin, warm, darker than his pale complexion and Evelyn's light olive tone. Their curls framed their faces in a way neither Evelyn nor Marcus carried. "Marcus," she said, her voice breaking, "please, don't do this." His jaw tightened, his fists curling at his sides. "Who did you betray me with?" "I didn't." Evelyn's voice cracked under the weight of the accusation. Her body, still weak from labor, trembled as tears slid down her cheeks. "Marcus, these are your children, ours. I've never been unfaithful." But the shadow of stigma had already gripped him. He thought of the neighbors, the church, the whispers that would spread like wildfire in Savannah. His pride burned hotter than any love he had carried. To raise children whose skin told a story he didn't want told, his ego couldn't allow it. The babies began to cry, their small voices filling the room as though they felt the storm in their father's chest. Evelyn reached instinctively for Jordan, pulling him close, rocking him. "Please, don't turn away. They need you." But Marcus stepped back. His voice trembled with fury. "Don't expect me to raise children who aren't mine." Evelyn sobbed openly, shaking her head. "They are yours. Marcus, look at me. Look at them. Please." He turned, his shoulders rigid, and walked toward the door. She screamed his name, but the door slammed shut, and with it went every promise they had ever made. The room felt colder. Evelyn's sobs mixed with the cries of her children. The moment of joy now twisted into despair. She whispered broken words against Jordan's forehead. "I'll protect you. I'll protect all of you, no matter what." Hours passed. Nurses checked in, their pity heavy in their eyes. When a knock finally sounded, Evelyn's heart leapt. She thought Marcus had come back. Instead, a nurse carried 2 duffel bags, setting them gently at the foot of the bed. "Your husband left these at the front desk," she said softly. Evelyn's breath caught. She fumbled for the zipper, pulling open the first bag. Clothes from home. In the pocket, a folded note. Her hands shook as she opened it. 4 words in Marcus's handwriting stared back at her. "Don't come back." Her world shattered. She clutched her phone, dialing his number again and again, each attempt ending in voicemail. Her messages blurred with tears. "Marcus, please, call me. We need to talk. The babies need you. I need you." Silence answered every time. Then came the bank notification. Withdrawal of $12,547.38. Balance, $0. Her chest hollowed. He hadn't just abandoned her, he had stripped her of every resource to survive. Alone, broke, and with 3 fragile lives depending on her. Evelyn felt the weight of betrayal crush down on her. She sank back against the pillow, clutching Jordan to her chest, her tears falling onto his blanket. Layla whimpered softly in her bassinet, Caleb flailing his fists as though he too raged against the cruelty of the world. Evelyn whispered through sobs, "I don't know how, but I'll fight for you, I swear." In that sterile hospital room, with the faint buzz of fluorescent lights and the cries of her children echoing off the walls, Evelyn Johnson's life as she knew it ended. And another, one built on resilience, stigma, and survival, began. The next morning, Evelyn Johnson sat upright in the hospital bed, her body aching from labor and her spirit weighed down by betrayal. Her 3 babies lay swaddled in their bassinets, the soft rhythm of their breathing the only sound in the room. She had not slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marcus's face twisted with suspicion, heard the venom in his voice, and felt the sting of the note that told her she no longer had a husband or a home. Her phone lay silent on the tray beside her. Dozens of calls had gone unanswered, her voice messages ignored. At some point in the night, she realized he wasn't coming back. Not now, not ever. He had made his choice, and she was the one left to carry the weight. Evelyn reached for Jordan, his tiny fists curled tightly against his chest. She cradled him to her breast, rocking gently, whispering words he could not understand but she needed to say. "I'm here. I'll never leave you. No matter what." Layla stirred in her sleep, whimpering softly, while Caleb stretched and yawned, his face scrunching before he settled again. They were so small, so innocent, and yet already burdened by the cruelty of the world. The door creaked open. Evelyn's eyes darted up, her breath catching in hope, but it wasn't Marcus. Instead, her mother stepped into the room. Ruth Carter's presence filled the space with a quiet strength that Evelyn had leaned on her entire life. She was in her early 60s, her hair silver at the temples, but her back still straight, her eyes sharp with wisdom earned from years of struggle. She wore a simple cardigan over a floral dress, and her hands, calloused from decades of work, carried more comfort than any words could. "Mom," Evelyn whispered, her voice breaking. "Oh, my sweet girl," Ruth said, crossing the room in hurried steps. She gathered Evelyn into her arms, careful not to disturb Jordan. Evelyn collapsed into the embrace, sobs breaking free as her mother stroked her hair. "Shh," Ruth whispered, her voice steady, her tone the same she used when Evelyn was a child crying after scraped knees or broken hearts. "You're not alone. I'm here now. We'll get through this." When Ruth pulled back, her eyes scanned the bassinets. She leaned over, gazing at her grandchildren for the first time. "Oh, Evelyn," she breathed, her lips curving into a tender smile. "They're beautiful. Absolutely beautiful." Evelyn nodded, wiping at her face. "Marcus doesn't think so. He said they aren't his. He left us, Mom. He emptied the account. He's gone." Ruth's jaw tightened. Her gaze softened for Evelyn, but there was fire behind her eyes. She shook her head slowly. That man always carried too much pride and too little sense, and now he shone his true colors. Evelyn's lip trembled. "What am I supposed to do? I have nothing. No home, no money, 3 babies to care for. I can't—" "Stop right there," Ruth said firmly, cutting through the spiral of panic. She placed a hand on Evelyn's shoulder, her voice resolute. "You can, and you will. Do you think you're the first woman to be left behind? Do you think I don't know what this feels like? Evelyn looked at her mother, blinking back tears. What do you mean? Ruth exhaled slowly, pulling up a chair beside the bed. She reached for Layla, cradling the baby with the practiced ease of someone who had raised children through hardship. You know I raised you on my own after your daddy walked out. I worked 2 jobs. I stretched every dollar until it cried. People whispered about me, said I wasn't enough, but I refused to let their words define me. And look at you now. You're here, strong, a mother yourself. Evelyn swallowed hard, remembering the fragments of stories her mother had told her, the quiet nights, when Ruth would rock her and confess how she'd survived days with nothing but willpower and prayer. She had admired her mother's strength then, but now she truly understood the cost of it. Ruth kissed Layla's forehead. This world will always find something to judge, Evelyn. Your children's skin, your choices, your strength. Don't you ever let that break you. These babies are a blessing, and blessings don't come with condition. Evelyn closed her eyes, tears streaming silently, her mother's words wrapped around her like armor. But people will talk, she whispered. They'll say things, they'll judge me. They already do, Ruth said bluntly. Let them. Their whispers can't raise children. Their opinions can't put food on your table. You live for these little ones now, not for them. For the first time since Marcus stormed out, Evelyn let herself breathe a little deeper. The weight was still crushing, but her mother's steady voice gave her a thread of hope to cling to. When the hospital released her 2 days later, Ruth was there with a battered sedan and a quilt folded neatly in the back seat. Together they buckled the babies into borrowed car seats, Evelyn moving slowly, still sore from delivery. The drive back to Ruth's small Savannah home was quiet. Evelyn stared out the window, watching the city pass by, her heart sinking as she imagined the whispers already spreading. Marcus's absence would not go unnoticed, and neither would the triplets' skin. When they pulled into Ruth's driveway, Evelyn felt a pang of shame. She had lived here once as a child, then vowed she'd never return except as a visitor. Yet here she was, defeated and desperate. Don't you look at this as failure, Ruth said, sensing her daughter's thoughts as she turned off the engine. This house has always been your home, and it's where you and these babies will heal. Inside, Ruth had already prepared. The guest room had been transformed into a makeshift nursery. 3 second-hand cribs stood side by side, quilts neatly tucked in, stacks of diapers and baby clothes folded with precision. The faint scent of lavender lingered in the air, and wind chimes jingled softly outside the window. Evelyn's throat tightened. Mom, you did all this? Ruth smiled gently. Of course. Did you think I wasn't going to be ready for my grandchildren? That night, as Evelyn lay in bed with Jordan nestled against her chest and Layla and Caleb, sleeping nearby, the exhaustion of childbirth and heartbreak threatened to pull her under. But for the first time, she didn't feel completely alone. Her mother's footsteps in the hallway, the hum of a lullaby from the kitchen, the warmth of Ruth's presence, these were lifelines. Still, fear lingered. The whispers would come. People would question, assume, and judge. Evelyn knew the stigma was real, but as she gazed at her children, she made herself a promise. You are mine, you are loved, and no one will ever take that from you. Morning crept through the thin curtains in Ruth Carter's spare bedroom, laying a pale ribbon of light across 3 small cribs. Evelyn Johnson woke before the alarm, the way new mothers learn to. Do, not from sleep, but from the rhythm of tiny sounds, Jordan's soft hiss of breath, Layla's sigh that fluttered like a moth against silence, Caleb's determined grunt as he kicked free of his blanket. For a moment she lay still and listened. Survival, she realized, begins with listening. She rose carefully, easing aching legs over the edge of the bed and crossed the room. The house was old and honest about it. The floorboards voiced every step. She checked each child with the reverence of someone touching a miracle, hand to the forehead, fingers to the chest to feel the steady lift and fall, a quiet kiss for luck. At the 3rd crib, she paused. Caleb had wriggled himself sideways, stubborn as always. She straightened him and smiled when he scowled in his sleep as if she had interrupted a mission. Ruth was already humming down the hall, the tune older than any of them. In the kitchen, she had set water to boil and laid out bottles, a measuring scoop, a neat row of towels folded with military precision. She slid bread into the toaster, glanced up, and saw Evelyn in the doorway. Without a word, she poured coffee, added just enough cream to soften its edge, and pressed the warm mug into her daughter's hands. The gesture said everything. You're here, you're safe, we will do this together. They learned the choreography of caring for 3 newborns the way. Dancers learned steps in the dark. by counting, by touch, by trust. Evelyn took Jordan first, then Layla, then Caleb, rotating through feedings while Ruth burped one and changed another. They kept a notebook on the counter, logging times, ounces, naps, small triumphs. When laughter came, it arrived in gusts, at the synchronized hiccup of all three, at the way Layla threaded her fingers through. Caleb's blanket fringe, at the sight of Jordan staring up as if he were memorizing the ceiling to redraw it later. The first outing was a test of planning and faith. They needed diapers, wipes, a pack of formula, the cheapest that didn't make anyone's belly ache. Evelyn strapped one car seat onto the stroller and clipped two more onto the shopping cart with Ruth's help. People stared, then smiled, then started talking as if Triplets invited public ownership of wonder. The cashier leaned over the conveyor belt and cooed, asking their names and who was the oldest, as if a single minute could crown a child with rank. A boy in line tugged his mother's sleeve and whispered, "Are they all hers?" Evelyn pretended not to hear the tone that sat between awe and judgment. She kept her voice sunny and soft, thanking people for their congratulations, deflecting questions. That kept circling back to how it was possible that her babies looked the way they did. In the car afterward, she gripped the steering wheel and let her smile fall. Ruth reached across and squeezed her wrist. "People come with questions," she said gently. "You don't owe them answers." "I know," Evelyn said. "I just wasn't ready for it to start this fast." "It started the minute those babies breathed," Ruth replied. "Let them breathe. You breathe too." Bills arrived like unwelcome weather. Hospital invoices itemized care in a way that made kindness look expensive. The joint account Marcus had drained did not refill itself with good intentions. Ruth pulled out a battered accordion folder and showed Evelyn the system she'd used when money was. Thin and days were long, envelopes for groceries, for gas, for baby supplies, for emergencies. Each week, cash went into each envelope and did not leave for any reason that wasn't written on its front. When it was gone, it was gone. It felt austere at first, then oddly liberating. Rules gave shape to fear. Evelyn applied for a receptionist position at a community clinic 3 bus lines away. The interview was plain and human. Mr. Lopez, the office manager, asked about her typing speed, her patience, her comfort with people who were sick and scared. Evelyn told the truth about all three. She did not talk about Marcus. She did not talk about the stairwell where she sometimes had to breathe through, a simmering panic when she thought about the future in one long stripe. She said, "I'm steady, I'm kind, and I learn fast." Mr. Lopez believed her and told her to start Monday. The clinic taught Evelyn the shape of other people's need. She learned to read the room, who needed a joke to step over fear, who needed silence, who needed a hand resting on the counter for exactly 3 beats before asking for a name and date of birth. She learned insurance acronyms that felt like a language invented to hide mercy. She learned to keep a candy jar on the desk and to refill it quietly when a child left with a lollipop tucked like a promise at the corner of their mouth. Carla, a nurse with a braid as thick as a rope and a laugh that filled the hallway, took to Evelyn immediately. She taught her tricks, how to angle the printer so it didn't jam, how to slide forms across the counter so the pen always found the right place to land, how to say "we'll figure this out" in a tone that made people believe it. On slow days, Carla asked for pictures of the babies and pretended to be offended when she got fewer than 6. On hard days, she put a hand on Evelyn's shoulder and said, "You're good at this. Don't forget." Evenings belonged to routines, bath, bottles, stories, sleep, the whole train of ordinary rituals that save people. Sometimes after the house fell quiet, Evelyn brought out library books that Ruth had found. They read about skin and hair and the sun's work, about melanin and ancestry and why some traits show up after sleeping for generations. The science did not erase the ache, but it steadied the ground under her feet. The next time a stranger's face folded into a question, she had words that were not apologies. Hair became its own education. As the babies grew and curls declared themselves, Evelyn made mistakes and learned. She bought the wrong comb. She bought the wrong brush. She bought the wrong leave-in conditioner. Then one Saturday on the porch, Miss Laverne from 2 houses down stopped mid-walk, hands on hips, and said, "Baby, no," with the kind of love that sounds like a scold. She came back 5 minutes later with a caddy that held a wide-tooth comb, a spray bottle, satin scrunchies, and a jar of something that smelled faintly of mango and miracles. She showed Evelyn how to part gently, how to finger detangle, how to twist while humming so a child's mind stayed charmed while their roots were protected. She explained bonnets at bedtime and pillowcases with less friction and the difference between dry thirsty and damp thirsty. Evelyn wrote it all down like she was studying for a test she refused to fail. When the triplets turned 1, the house filled with cousins and neighbors, and the kind of noise you want to bottle for later. Ruth baked 3 small cakes because fairness is theology at that age. Each child smashed a fistful of frosting while everyone cheered. Evelyn stepped back to watch, Ruth passing plates with the speed of a bartender. Miss Laverne pointing with her chin at a crooked streamer, a gaggle of kids circling like planets around a table of chips, and felt a new kind of gratitude that did not erase what she had lost, but made room around it. At their 2-year checkup, Dr. Sloan, a pediatrician who wore colorful socks and a lanyard heavy with pins, asked Evelyn if she had any concerns. Evelyn said she worried about how the world would meet her children. Dr. Sloan nodded, as if the question came up as often as growth charts. She said, "You can't change the world's eyes, but you can strengthen your children's sight. Narrate who they are before anyone else does." She suggested books with families that looked like theirs, TV shows that didn't treat difference, like a plot twist, and community spaces where the triplets could absorb pride by proximity. Evelyn wrote down titles, show names, and the address of a Saturday story hour across town. The first time someone at the grocery store asked, "Are you their nanny?" Evelyn felt heat rise to her face. The woman wore a smile that wanted to be kind and a tone that assumed too much. Evelyn kept her hands on the handle of the cart so they wouldn't clench. "I'm their mother," she said evenly. The woman blinked, confused, then pasted on a compliment about how cute they were and wheeled away. In the car later, Evelyn trembled with anger and then with the shame of anger. Ruth listened and then said, "You answered right. That was enough. Every time you answer right, your children learn how to answer for themselves." Work made a small ladder for Evelyn to climb. She learned scheduling software that had defeated 2 people before her. She made a binder of how-to pages, screenshots, arrows, margin notes, so anyone could step in and not drown. Mr. Lopez noticed and moved her to a front desk lead role on days when the waiting room swelled and tempers ran hot. The extra dollars mattered, but it was the trust that steadied her more than the money. She was building something, not just paying for it. Ruth's health stayed largely sturdy, punctuated by the kind of warnings that come with time. An ache in the wrist on rainy days, a back that complained after lifting a child who no longer counted as light. Evelyn watched and adjusted. She installed a rail in the tub, insisted on carrying the laundry basket, prepped meals on Sundays so dinners cooked themselves later. Ruth rolled her eyes with fond annoyance and said, "You think you invented taking care of people?" They went to church when they had the strength and the weather was kind. The congregation loved babies, as if that were the point of their theology. People clucked and cooed, and sometimes asked questions that sounded soft and felt sharp. Ruth stood like a tree no wind could bend. Evelyn learned to do the same. By the time the triplets were 3, their personalities had declared themselves cleanly enough to be a family joke. Jordan lined up his blocks by color and insisted the stripes on his shirt point the same direction as the lines on the rug. He found paper wherever it hid and drew until his wrist gave up. Layla wanted reasons, ladders made of whys that she climbed until she reached the rafters of a conversation. Caleb loved rules only when he had written them and negotiated others with a lawyer's persistence. They fought over a single red truck as if no other object had ever existed and then fell asleep in a row like sailors on a ship that only sailed at 8:30 p.m. Kindness came from corners that surprised them. The clinic hosted a back-to-school drive and sent Evelyn home with a box of office supplies that had outlived their usefulness at work but found purpose on the dining room table as crayons were sharpened and dull scissors became good enough for paper crowns. A neighbor named Mr. Wiley, with a yard full of tools, fixed a rattle in Ruth's sedan for the price of a peach cobbler. A teacher from the church nursery wrote the children's names in bubbling letters on laminated tags and told Evelyn, this way their bags find their way back even when days go sideways. One afternoon, Carla from the clinic stopped by after her shift with a crate she pretended was nothing at all. Inside, there were hand-me-down shoes, a stack of onsies sized for the next season, and a book called Shades of People that showed children of every hue laughing in the light. "I saw it and thought of your 3, she said, embarrassed by her own tenderness. Evelyn hugged her so hard the crate wobbled. That night she read the book twice, then a third time when Layla asked, "Again?" The words felt like a spell cast against ignorance. We are all the color of the earth and the sun and the stories our families tell. When the triplets turned 4, preschool loomed like a mountain, and then, slowly, like a meadow. Evelyn waded through wait lists and tours and paperwork that asked more questions than a census. She sat in a small chair across from Miss Whitaker, the director of a center that smelled faintly of glue sticks and apple juice, and tried to describe her children without turning them into resumes. Miss Whitaker listened kindly and said there was 1 spot open now and 2 opening at mid-year if they could weather a staggered start. Staggered felt like a word for a different kind of walking, the kind you do after a blow. They said yes. The first day, Jordan clutched a crayon he had brought from home as if it were a passport. Layla asked where the fish went when the lights were turned off at night, and Ms. Whitaker answered as if the question were the most natural thing a human could ask. Caleb negotiated for an extra minute at the puzzle table before joining the circle. Evelyn kissed each forehead and handed out promises like rations. "I'll be right here at 3. I will always come back." She left and sat in the car for 10 minutes with her hands on the steering wheel, practicing breathing while tears made a clean road down her face. The first parent-to-teacher conference happened in a room full of drawings that were better at conveying joy than realism. Ms. Whitaker spoke about each child as if she admired them, not as if she were grading them. "Jordan sees patterns before other kids do," she said. "He makes order because it makes him feel safe. Let's give him space to do that and teach him how to unclench when the world refuses to align. Layla is a question with feet. That's a gift. We'll help her learn when to ask and when to listen. And Caleb, he knows exactly who he is. That will help him until the day it gets in his way. We'll teach him the humility that makes strength useful." Evelyn wrote down every sentence like it might evaporate if she didn't catch it. The negotiations at the edge of stigma never ended, but they changed shape. One day on the playground, a little boy asked bluntly, "How come your mom is light and you're not?" Layla blinked, glanced at Evelyn, and then said in the patient voice of someone explaining, "The obvious. Our family is a lot of colors because our people are from a lot of places." The boy considered this and then asked if she wanted to see how far he could jump. Evelyn exhaled with relief, so physical her shoulders dropped. Later she told Layla she had handled it perfectly. Layla said, "I just told the truth and asked if frogs dreamed in color." There were hard days that did not ask permission. A stomach bug roared through the house and knocked them down like pins. Ruth caught it last and bore it with a stoicism that scared Evelyn more than complaints would have. On the 3rd night, when the washing machine finally stopped humming, Evelyn found Ruth asleep at the table with her head on a cookbook open to a page about chicken soup. She slid a blanket over her mother's shoulders and thought, "I will never be finished owing this woman." Evelyn's anger at Marcus dulled from a blade to a stone. She carried it in her pocket and rubbed it when memories called her, but it no longer cut her palm. On some nights she allowed herself to imagine alternate scenes, the door opening, an apology offered while it could have still saved something. On other nights, she imagined nothing at all, because the mind also deserves mercy. When she talked about him with Ruth, it was in the flat tone of a census, facts with no garnish. She did not speak his name in front of the children unless they asked, and they rarely did. When they did, she told the truth the way you dress a wound, clean, careful, quick. "Your father left. He was wrong. You were never the reason. We are safe. We are loved." As year 5 drew close, the house seemed to have learned the children's height. Hooks appeared at the right level, stools tucked under sinks, picture. Books arranged so small hands could choose without toppling the world. Evelyn looked around and felt a complicated pride. The life she had built was modest, but every corner bore evidence of intention. The envelope system still lived in the drawer by the stove. The binder at work had grown thick with pages and praise. The triplets knew their neighbors' names and the mail carrier's dog's name. Ruth had taken to sitting on the front steps at sunset with a cup of tea. The wind chimes talking in 3 notes, saying nothing and everything. For their 5th birthday, Evelyn decided on a small party in the yard. She made a list that pretended to be reasonable and then lengthened it anyway. Streamers, paper crowns, juice boxes, a bubble machine that would either work or become a lesson in disappointment. Jordan wanted a cake with lines like the field at a baseball game. Layla wanted candles that sparkled. Caleb wanted to blow out everyone's wishes. Evelyn compromised without calling it that. A simple sheet cake with green frosting. And white stripes, star-shaped sparklers in a mason jar for after. And 3 sets of candles so no one's breath had to share. Neighbors came with folding chairs and the kind of gifts that don't appear on registries. A jar of pickles homemade from cucumbers that grew in stubborn soil. A wooden truck sanded smooth by hands older than grief. A set of watercolor paints. Because Miss Laverne had noticed Jordan's drawings lined up on the hallway wall. The kids took turns at a homemade obstacle course that required more cheering than skill. Ruth manned the grill with the authority of a general and the sweetness of a grandmother. Evelyn floated, refilling cups, telling people to take seconds, hiding for 30 seconds in the kitchen when noise pressed too close, then stepping back into sunlight as if nothing had ever threatened to eclipse it. As dusk softened everything into forgiving edges, Evelyn called the children to the makeshift cake table. The triplets stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces lit by 5 candles each. Evelyn made a wish that was less a wish than a prayer, that the peace they felt in that moment would leave a trace inside them sturdy enough to survive future storms. She said, 1, 2, 3, and all 3 drew breath. Smoke curled upward in a slow ribbon, and people cheered from a place in their bodies older than words. Later, after the last dish was dried and the yard was reclaimed from chaos, Evelyn tucked the children into bed and sat with Ruth on the steps. The air smelled faintly of sugar and charcoal. Fireflies embroidered the dark. Ruth rubbed a sore spot in her wrist and said, "You did good today." Evelyn leaned her cheek against her shoulder for a moment, a gesture she had not performed since she was a girl. "We did good," she said. "We keep doing good." Ruth nodded. "That's the whole secret. Keep going." Inside the house, the triplets slept hard, their breaths a triplet rhythm that had become the metronome of the home. Evelyn stood in the doorway of their room longer than she needed to, letting her eyes adjust, cataloging the outlines, a stuffed giraffe on the floor, a pair of socks that had slipped off like they always did, a drawing taped crooked to the dresser. She listened, the way mothers do when listening is the only way to measure peace. Savannah could be cruel in its curiosity, but it was also kind in the ways that mattered most. The city had held her when she fell, gave her odd jobs and good advice, shook its head at the right times, laughed with her children, even on days when the laughter sounded like something borrowed. Evelyn had learned to live with the bothness of things, the sting and the salve, the question and the answer, the memory and the plan. She did not know that another season of fear would find them. She did not sense that night on the steps with Ruth that a shadow was already doing the slow arithmetic of return somewhere beyond her understanding. What she knew was simpler and, for that evening, sufficient. Her children were 5 and sleeping. Her mother was beside her like a harbor. And tomorrow she would wake before the alarm and begin again with listening. Life has a way of pretending to settle just before it reminds you how fragile peace can be. By the time the triplets turned 5, Evelyn Johnson believed she had finally reached a steady rhythm. Her days followed a pattern she could trust, mornings at the clinic where she worked as a receptionist, afternoons at home helping with homework, or refereeing arguments over crayons, evenings spent with Ruth sharing tea at the kitchen table while the wind chimes murmured outside. Savannah had become manageable. The stares when people noticed the contrast between Evelyn's skin and her children's had dulled to background noise. She had grown used to brushing off curious questions with calm answers or, when necessary, with silence. She carried herself with a new steadiness, a kind of armor forged through years of surviving. Yet even armor wears thin when life decides to test its edges. It began quietly, almost forgettably. One morning when she fetched the mail, sandwiched between bills and a flyer for a local church picnic, there was a plain white envelope, no return address, no stamp other than what was required. She tore it open at the kitchen counter, expecting an advertisement. Inside was a single slip of paper. "Liar. You'll pay for what you did." The words were jagged, pressed so hard into the paper that the ink had bled slightly. Evelyn froze, staring at the page. Her stomach turned as though she had swallowed ice. At first, she wanted to dismiss it. Maybe it was some kind of sick prank, a mistake. She tucked the note into a drawer and tried not to think about it. That evening, she didn't mention it to Ruth. She told herself it was nothing. But a week later, another note appeared, this time tucked under the windshield wiper of her car at the clinic parking lot. "You destroyed everything. Now it's your turn." Evelyn's knees nearly gave out. She looked around the lot, but there were only a few nurses chatting near the entrance and a patient climbing into a taxi. Still, she felt eyes on her, cold and watching. She shoved the note into her purse and drove home with white knuckles gripping the steering wheel. At the kitchen table, after the children had gone to bed, she finally showed Ruth both notes. Ruth's lips pressed into a firm line as she read. "Marcus," she said simply. Evelyn nodded, her throat tight. "It has to be him. Nobody else would." She couldn't finish. "Then you keep these," Ruth instructed, sliding the papers back toward her. "And you call the police. Don't you wait." The officer at the precinct was sympathetic but cautious. "We'll file a report, ma'am, but unless there's more evidence or the threats escalate, there's not much we can do." Evelyn left with a pamphlet about home security systems and the uneasy knowledge that her safety and her children's might rest on her own vigilance. Weeks passed. She tried to hide her growing paranoia from Jordan, Layla, and Caleb, but children notice more than adults expect. She double-checked the locks at night, sometimes 3 or 4 times. She installed a new deadbolt, then added a bar across the back door. She kept the curtains drawn after sunset. Then came the evening that shattered any pretense of safety. After a long day at the clinic, Evelyn slid into bed, exhausted. As she adjusted her pillow, her hand brushed against something hard beneath the case. Her heart lurched. She pulled it out, her fingers trembling. Another note. "I'm closer than you think." Her blood ran cold. Someone had been inside the house. The realization nearly paralyzed her. She rushed to check on the triplets, finding them asleep in their beds, unaware of the storm gathering around them. She stood in the doorway, her hands shaking, her mind racing. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. This was intrusion. The next day, she gathered the children at the kitchen table. She kept her voice calm, steady, the way one must when explaining storms to children. "There are people in the world who aren't kind," she began. "If someone ever talks to you and you don't know them, you come straight to me or Grandma. If you ever see something strange, you tell me right away. Understand?" Jordan looked confused but nodded. Layla asked, "Is someone trying to hurt us?" Evelyn swallowed hard and said, "No one will hurt you. That's my job, to keep you safe." Caleb, stubborn as always, said, "I'll protect you too, Mommy." She hugged him fiercely, hiding her tears in his curls. The threats did not stop. Notes slipped under the door, notes left in the mailbox. Then one day, as she picked up the children from school, Mrs. Whitaker, their teacher, handed her a folded paper with concern in her eyes. "I found this in Isaiah's cubby," she said softly. Evelyn unfolded it. "You can't run from the truth." Her hands shook as she crumpled the note. She felt nausea rise, her heart thudding in her chest. The children, sensing her fear, grew quiet. That night, Evelyn spread every note across the table, the stack thicker than she had realized. Ruth sat beside her, her face grave. "He's closing in," Evelyn whispered. "What if something happens to the kids?" Ruth's hand covered hers. "Then we leave," she said firmly. "We'll go somewhere he can't find us." Evelyn stared at the notes, at the angry scrawl that once belonged to the man she thought she knew. The decision formed heavy and certain inside her. She could not wait for safety to find her. She would have to seize it herself. The decision to leave did not arrive as a dramatic declaration. It settled in Evelyn Johnson's chest, like something heavy but sensible, a weight she could carry because her children needed her to. After the last note surfaced in Isaiah's cubby, and she watched fear flicker behind Layla's questions and tighten the line of Caleb's mouth, the choice no longer felt like running. It felt like choosing life. That night, she laid every threatening scrap of paper across the kitchen table, aligned them in the order. They had come, took photographs with her phone, and slid the originals into a thick plastic sleeve. Ruth Carter sat across from her, reading each one with the same steady attention she used when double-checking a recipe she already knew by heart. Neither of them raised their voice. The house was quiet except for the slow tick of the stove clock and the wind chimes outside, moving just enough to prove there was weather in the world beyond their worry. In the morning, Evelyn returned to the precinct with the folder under her arm. The officer who had taken her earlier report met her eyes with the kind of tired kindness you learn after a decade in uniform. He examined the photos and the notes, listened without interruption, and then leaned forward with his hands folded. "Relocation can be part of a safety plan," he said. "If you go, don't broadcast the new address. Use a P.O. box at first. Change your routines. Document any new contact. If you think he's followed you or shows up, you call us before you open the door." He slid a list across the desk, numbers for victim services, a line about restraining orders, a reminder to update the school. None of it felt like enough, and all of it felt like something. Back home, Evelyn and Ruth began inventorying their lives. They decided what to take, what to give, and what to leave behind without apology. 3 plastic tubs for the children's essentials, clothes that still fit, shoes that didn't pinch, the satin, bonnets Miss Laverne had insisted on, a caddy of hair care supplies that had become its own ritual, a box for books, picture books about families of all colors, the worn board editions they had chewed on as toddlers, and a growing stack of library paperbacks about space because Jordan liked the idea of distance measured by light. Another for school supplies, puzzle pieces in a zip bag, a pencil case decorated with stickers Layla had organized into a grid because even chaos was improved by pattern. The rest of the house told them what mattered by the way their hands lingered. Ruth's cast iron skillet, burning with a decade of dinners. A hand-me-down quilt, a framed drawing of 3 stick-figure children holding a woman's hands wider than the paper allowed. Saying goodbye to Savannah took a week, and also one long afternoon. Evelyn gave notice. At the clinic with a posture that tried to be all business and failed around the eyes. Mr. Lopez listened, pinched the bridge of his nose, and then called Carla. From the back hallway, because some goodbyes require witnesses and casseroles, Carla hugged Evelyn until the world quieted for 3 seconds, and then pressed a small envelope into her palm, a handwritten reference letter, and a gift card tucked inside. "For gas," Carla said, avoiding tears by blustering, "and for snacks that aren't good for you but make everything better." On her last day, the nursing staff gathered around the front desk with a cupcake that wore too much, frosting, and a card that everyone had signed with messages that didn't try to fix anything. The candy jar that had sat beside the pen cup for years went into a grocery bag. "Take it," Mr. Lopez said. "It belongs where your desk is." Neighbors made the work of leaving feel less like erasure. Mr. Wiley fixed the rattle that had returned to Ruth's sedan and refused payment with a wave that said, "You'll pay me by arriving safe." Miss Laverne came over with a shoebox labeled for new beginnings, a satin pillowcase, 2 spare, bonnets, a wide-tooth comb, and a jar of the mango miracle cream that had saved many nights. She stood in the doorway, one hand on her hip, and looked at the triplets like a general reviewing troops. "Use water first," she commanded, "and patience second. The rest is just practice." The church lady sent them off with a grocery sack of foil-wrapped love, cornbread that traveled well, chicken you could eat cold, and a note from the pastor that promised, "We'll keep your pew warm if you find your way back." The triplets processed the plan in the languages their personalities spoke. Jordan drew a map with a thick blue river, a green house on one side, and a purple house on the other, a dotted line between them and 3 stick figures crossing that line holding balloons. Layla asked 47 questions and then condensed the answers into 3. Where will we sleep? Is there a library? Will Grandma still sing the same songs? Caleb negotiated for the window seat and the right to pick a new nightlight shaped like a rocket ship, because if you're going somewhere new, you might as well take the moon with you. They left before dawn on a Tuesday. The car smelled like coffee and clean laundry, like peppermints, because Ruth insisted they help with motion sickness and worry. Evelyn checked the back door twice, then once more, and placed the spare key under a plant only because habit is a rope you don't cut all at once. She strapped the children in, adjusting the belts with the muscle memory of 100 trips to preschool and the grocery store. The back seat was a small ecosystem of comfort: blankets, stuffed animals, a tote bag of books, a pack of crayons, and a box of crackers that would crumble into the seams in 30 miles. She closed the front door quietly out of respect for a house that had sheltered them and sat behind the wheel with both hands steady at 10 and 2. Ruth settled in beside her and patted the dashboard. "Take us north, baby," she said. "We'll let the rest work itself out as we go." Highway miles measure decisions differently than clocks do. The city fell behind them, then the marsh, then signs that spoke the language of exits and distances. The children dozed and woke in soft cycles. Jordan kept a running tally of bridges as if it were a game only he knew the rules to. Layla asked whether clouds had names and accepted Ruth's answer that some did and some kept their secrets. Caleb turned the map into a paper airplane, launched it, apologized when it landed in the bag of crackers, and declared that meant Charlotte wanted them to bring snacks. They listened to a playlist that swung between lullabies and old gospel, and a radio station that promised variety and delivered it in the profane sense: 1 minute a pop anthem and the next a weather update that sounded like good news. Clear skies ahead. They stopped at a gas station that had a playground with one plastic slide and a picnic table sunburned to a soft gray. Ruth stretched her back and shook her wrists like a boxer before a round. Evelyn guided the children through a bathroom line that felt like a small parade and taught them how to stand in the patch of shade beside the car like it was a secret fort. They ate sandwiches from a cooler and counted how many red trucks passed in 5 minutes. A woman with a toddler on her hip admired the triplets and asked if they were all hers with a bright curiosity that didn't try to pry. Evelyn nodded and said, "Yes," and felt something settle under her ribs. Charlotte announced itself with traffic and trees, with a skyline that surprised them not. With height, but with how the buildings looked like glass trying to catch the light. Evelyn followed the directions she had printed and taped to the dashboard, because phones die and paper remembers. The rental agent met them at a small house on a quiet street where porches faced each other like polite neighbors. The place smelled faintly of paint and possibility. The living room had a window big enough to invite morning in. The kitchen had cabinets that closed all the way. There were 3 small bedrooms and a narrow hallway where 100 art projects would fit from end to end. It was not much. It was exactly enough. Before unloading, Evelyn walked through the rooms with a notebook. She wrote down what needed attention and what needed a promise. Deadbolt, she wrote. Curtains, door chime. She checked the windows. She made a plan to buy motion lights and a doorbell camera, because vigilance is a language you keep learning. Ruth unpacked the bag of foil-wrapped food and slid a pan of chicken into the oven as if no kitchen was new, as long as you could make it smell like home. The triplets ran from room to room claiming corners and arguing amiably about who got which wall, because the geography of childhood is a map you draw with your feet. The first night in a new house is always longer than the clock says. After the bags were in and the beds made as well as they could be, Evelyn sat on the floor in the hallway and listened. The sounds were unfamiliar. Pipes announcing themselves, a distant train, a neighbor's dog explaining a squirrel. She looked at the deadbolt and the chain she had installed and the doorstop she would screw into the floor tomorrow. Ruth padded down the hall in slippers and handed her a mug of tea that counted as permission to sleep. "You did a big thing today," Ruth said, leaning against the wall and letting her shoulder rest. "Let the house watch us for a while. We'll teach it our names." Morning established the rituals that would carry them. Evelyn found a grocery store and learned the fastest way to get there and back. She filled out mail forwarding forms at the post office and opened a P.O. box that made their address a number in a row instead of a place on a map. She found the nearest library, walked the children through the quiet splendor of aisles, and joined in 3 minutes because some membership cards feel like keys. The librarian at the children's desk, Miss Andrea, according to a name tag decorated with book stickers, recommended a stack of titles before Evelyn had asked, as if she had been listening to their lives from down a hallway. Jordan hugged a book about constellations and started looking at ceilings again, as if they might hold coordinates. Layla selected a set of beginner science experiments and promised not to make the kitchen smell like a volcano. Caleb chose a book with flaps to lift and pretended not to be delighted every time a dinosaur popped out. Work followed faster than she expected. Evelyn had spent a late evening after the children fell asleep tailoring her resume to a logistics firm that needed an administrative assistant, someone who could handle schedules and shipment forms and people who were impatient on the phone. Her cover letter told the truth without telling all of it. She knew how to organize details until they lined up, how to keep calm when the room didn't, and how to make customers feel heard without promising miracles. Miss Patel from Human Resources called the next afternoon. The interview was 3 days later in a building that buzzed with forklifts out back and printers in front. Miss Patel introduced Evelyn to her would-be manager, Mr. Kim, who wore a tie that tried for serious, and a smile that admitted this was a place where people worked hard and wanted to be done by 5. He asked how she handled pressure. Evelyn said, "I listen carefully, then I make a plan, then I stick to it." He nodded like that was the answer he was taught to hope for, and told her to start Monday. The job came with a headset and a desk that faced a glass wall looking into a room where people in safety vests danced with pallets in a choreography that valued inches. Evelyn learned the software that tracked shipments and the shortcuts that saved her wrists. She built a new binder of how-to pages, labeling each tab with an index of problems she could solve, reschedule, reroute, reprint, reassure. The warehouse guys learned to call her when a label printer beeped in distress, and teased her by pretending to break it just to see if she would scowl. She didn't. She looked at the machine like it was a child who needed clearer instructions and coaxed it back to work. Co-workers became new points on a map that didn't require a GPS. Tiana, who had started 2 months earlier, showed Evelyn where the coffee was strong and the gossip weak. Ray from Dispatch signed his emails best-ish and left a bowl of mints on his desk that became community property. Mr. Kim praised her in public for handling a surge of calls after a weather delay and corrected her in private when she missed a small step in a complicated form, the kind of management that makes people better without making them small. Enrolling the triplets in school required patience and proof. Charlotte's enrollment office asked for documents that could prove identity, residency, immunization, and intent to be good citizens. Evelyn had everything in a neat folder because she had learned years ago. That neatness sometimes convinces the world you belong where you are. The school assigned them to Cedar Ridge Elementary, a short drive from their house, with a playground that flashed brightly in the afternoon, and a mural of children holding hands around the world as if art could compel behavior. Principal Hawkins met them with a smile that suggested he had seen joy and trouble in equal measure, and still loved the building. He knelt to the children's eye level, introduced himself, and asked what each of them loved. Jordan answered drawing, Layla said questions, and Caleb looked at the soccer field and said running, because sometimes you know already where you'll spend recess. Their teachers felt like an answer to a question Evelyn had been asking without language. Miss Green in 3rd grade spoke to Jordan as though patterns were a second language, and made a space on the wall for his drawings that didn't look like anyone else's. Miss Alvarez in the next classroom told Layla that good questions were a kind of light and gave her a notebook labeled investigation so she would have a place to put them. Coach D in PE taught Caleb the rules kindly, and then, when Caleb tried to modify them, added a drill about listening that made him laugh despite himself. Ruth found her circle with the velocity of someone who had honed the skill across state lines. She started at the community center 2 blocks over, where a bulletin board offered yoga on Tuesdays, a blood pressure screening on Thursdays, and a quilting circle that met whenever they pleased. She skipped the yoga, crushed the screening, and walked into the quilting room like it had waited for her. Within a week, she had offered to bring biscuits to the next meet-up and had already been identified as the person who would notice when anyone sat quiet too long and needed to be asked, "How are you?" Saturdays began to taste like home faster than weekdays did. The farmer's market near the old rail corridor smelled like peaches and hot dough and a drizzle of something sweet on grilled corn. Evelyn let the children hold $5 each and taught them how to ask for prices and count change into their palms like a secret math. They met a woman who sold honey with pictures of her bees and a man who sold hand-carved whistles that sounded like birds if you were patient and like whistles if you weren't. They ate empanadas on a curb and watched a busker stack cups with a flourish that made children squeal and adults applaud. It was nothing like Savannah and exactly like a place that could be theirs. At home, they assembled safety the way some families assemble furniture, piece by piece, following instructions written across experience. Evelyn installed motion lights and a doorbell camera that connected to her phone and sent small pings of reassurance when it captured nothing but the mail carrier waving. She gave the school the P.O. box as the official mailing address and asked to be called for pickups and emergencies at any time. She introduced herself to the 3 closest neighbors with a smile and a sentence she practiced. "We're new. This is my mother, Ruth. These are my 3 kids. Please tell us if anything looks off." People nodded and said, "Will do," and meant it because most folks do, even if the internet suggests otherwise. 3 weeks passed without a note, a shadow, or a whisper from the past. The absence felt so loud at first that Evelyn could hear it in the quiet of the house. Slowly, the volume turned down. She slept through until her alarm, more nights than not. Ruth stopped checking the back door twice. The triplets learned the names of the kids on their street and came home dusty. From bike races that involved more rules than any adult could track, Jordan taped a new drawing above his bed, a skyline with 3 windows lit bright. Layla started a club called Solvers that met under the maple in the front yard, with membership requirements that changed daily but always included a handshake. Caleb joined a neighborhood soccer scrimmage and introduced himself as Fast, which turned out to be both branding and fact. Evelyn earned a small promotion, team coordinator for the front office, after Mr. Kim realized she was already doing half of what the title required. The bump in pay adjusted the budget envelope so groceries had a little more wiggle and the emergency fund earned a label with a date that made the future feel less like a cliff. She bought a second-hand bookshelf and lined it with library finds and the few new books the children had earned through the summer reading program. It became the first thing visitors noticed, which felt like a decision she was proud to have made. On an evening soft with early autumn, the neighborhood hosted a block cookout, with potluck rules and no theme other than bring what you love. Ruth brought her skillet and a pound of onions, and within 30 minutes half the block knew where the best smell was coming from. Evelyn watched the triplets run in a tangle with kids who would soon show up in class pictures, and she felt a sensation she recognized from those first weeks after the hospital when Ruth had hummed in the kitchen. A settling, not peace exactly, but the permission to build it. Later, after the folding chairs were stacked and the last foil pan was tucked into a fridge, Evelyn stood on her porch and looked down the street. Porch lights made a modest constellation, each house a small star dedicated to its own orbit of chores and jokes and arguments and laundry. She tried to name what she felt and landed on possible. The city did not promise safety, no place could, but it made room. It let her move without flinching. It let her children be themselves without becoming someone's lesson. Inside, Ruth sat at the table with a mug of tea in the mail. She held up a postcard from Carla, an illustration of a lighthouse and 3 sentences about missing her friend and a promise to visit. "People who love you find you," Ruth said, slipping the card into a drawer where good words lived until they were needed. Evelyn poured herself water, leaned against the counter and nodded. "We're findable," she said, "in a good way." She walked the hallway and paused, as she always did, at the doorway to the children's room. The nightlight cast a small galaxy across the ceiling. Caleb had kept his promise to bring the moon. Layla slept with her hand on a notebook, as if a question might try to escape if she didn't anchor it. Jordan's breath came slow and even, and a corner of paper peeked from under his pillow, a secret drawing keeping watch. Evelyn stood there and listened. The sounds of a new house had become the sounds of their house. On the way back to the kitchen, she glanced at the front door. The deadbolt was thrown. The chain sat in place. The motion light blinked once and rested. She knew the past had not been erased. It waited as pasts do, at the edge of what was being written. But tonight there were leftovers in the fridge, library books on the table, and a calendar on the wall with ordinary squares filled by ordinary plans. Field day, Ruth's quilting circle, a work meeting that would start late and end early if she steered it right. Ordinary, she realized, is the most extravagant kind of safety. She sat with Ruth for a while, talking about nothing and everything, trading. The quiet the way people do when they trust the silence to be kind. When she finally stood to turn off the kitchen light, Ruth reached for her hand. "Sleep," she said. "We'll do tomorrow." Evelyn squeezed back. "Together," she answered, and meant it with the fierceness of someone who had learned how fragile the word can be and chose it anyway. Then she walked down the hall, past the closed door that kept the night outside and the lights inside, and into a room where rest arrived like a visitor and, for once, did not check its watch. 5 years in Charlotte passed like the slow turning of pages in a book Evelyn Johnson sometimes could not believe she was writing. What had started as a fragile beginning, boxes on the floor, curtains improvised from, sheets and nights when fear kept her eyes open, grew into something that felt whole. The triplets were no longer toddlers tugging at her hands, but tall, curious children filling the house with their laughter, their disagreements, and their small victories. Each year carved more resilience into their bones. Each season carried them further from Savannah's shadows. Jordan developed the quiet intensity of an artist. His notebooks overflowed with sketches of skylines and faces, with shading. That grew more confident as his hands learned to obey his imagination. Layla's questions never slowed. She asked why the seasons turned, why birds knew when to fly, why some people feared what they didn't understand. Caleb became a runner, fleet-footed and determined, always the first to line, up for races at school and the last to quit even when the heat pressed down. Evelyn often stood in the doorway of their room at night watching them sleep, marveling at how much life could grow out of grief. Her work at the logistics company flourished. The binder of instructions she had once made for herself now guided new hires. Mr. Kim often introduced her to visitors as the backbone of this office, a compliment. That made her smile and deflect, but privately it filled her with pride. Promotions followed. She became team lead, then coordinator, each step lifting their finances closer to stability. Bills no longer felt like a mountain. The envelopes she and Ruth kept on the kitchen counter had more space in them at the end of the month. Ruth, still strong though the years added their weight, became known in the neighborhood as Miss Ruth, the grandmother who baked too much cornbread and never missed a school play. She kept her quilting circle, her tea rituals, her habit of sitting on the porch at dusk with a patience that reminded Evelyn of roots sunk deep into soil. When the triplets' 10th birthday approached, Evelyn wanted to do more than mark another year. She wanted to celebrate survival, growth, and the family they had become. She began planning weeks in advance, listing decorations, menus, and activities. "It's not just their birthday," she told Ruth one evening as they folded laundry. "It's proof we've made it this far." The backyard became their canvas. Bright balloons in red, blue, and gold bobbed along the fence. Streamers crossed the porch rails. A long table, borrowed from a neighbor, was set with paper plates and cups decorated with stars. Ruth manned the grill in her apron, commanding hamburgers and hot dogs with the authority of someone who had fed armies. Evelyn baked the centerpiece herself, a 3-tiered red velvet cake, each layer frosted with care, topped with 10 candles waiting to be lit. Children filled the yard with the noise of joy, races across the grass, laughter at the bubble machine, squeals as a piñata finally gave way. Parents mingled under the shade of a maple tree, sipping lemonade and sharing stories about work, school, and the little triumphs of raising kids. Jordan proudly showed his sketchbook to a friend, who marveled at how real his drawings looked. Layla organized a trivia contest, reading questions from a notebook she had filled with facts about planets and animals. Caleb led a soccer scrimmage, shouting encouragement to kids half his size, cheering louder for their goals than his own. Evelyn moved among the guests, her smile constant, her eyes often drifting. toward the children as if to reassure herself this was real. More than once, she caught Ruth watching her with quiet pride. "You've built something good here," her mother said when they stood side by side at the grill. Evelyn swallowed the lump in her throat. "We built it," she replied. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in orange and purple, Evelyn called everyone together. The cake was carried out to the yard, the candles flickering in the evening breeze. The crowd sang happy birthday, their voices weaving into a chorus that seemed to wrap around the family like a shield. The triplets squeezed their eyes shut, made wishes in unison, and blew out the candles. Cheers erupted. Camera flashes captured their wide grins frosting on their lips and the glow of a day that felt like victory. Later, when the gifts had been opened and the children sprawled on the porch, Steps with their friends, Evelyn and Ruth, stood at the edge of the yard. Fireflies blinked in the bushes, laughter echoed across the grass, and the night seemed gentle. "Look at them," Ruth whispered. "Strong, happy, loved." Evelyn nodded, her eyes misty. "For the first time, I feel like the past doesn't have its claws in us anymore. Like we're really free. But peace, she would soon learn, is fragile. It can last for years, giving you space to breathe, to build, to believe in tomorrow. And then, in a single moment, the past can walk back through the door you thought you had locked forever." The house had finally grown quiet after the birthday celebration. Paper cups and plates filled the trash bin, balloons bobbed lazily in the corner, and the faint smell of grilled food still lingered in the air. Ruth had retreated to her room with a sigh of exhaustion, promising to tackle the dishes with Evelyn in the morning. Upstairs, the triplets slept heavily, their bellies full of cake and their dreams filled with laughter from the day. Evelyn moved slowly through the living room, gathering stray wrapping paper into a bag. Her body was tired, but her spirit was light. She had watched her children run, play, and glow under the attention of friends and neighbors. She had seen them loved and celebrated. For a moment, she believed the shadows of the past had finally receded. Then the front door opened. The sound was soft, but in the silence it thundered. Evelyn spun around, her heart slamming against her ribs. She hadn't heard a knock. She hadn't heard footsteps on the porch. She froze, clutching the trash bag, as the door swung wide and a figure stepped inside. It was Marcus, but not the Marcus she remembered. His once broad shoulders were hunched, his clothes wrinkled and hanging loose. His face, once sharp with pride, was gaunt, the skin stretched thin over hollow cheeks. His eyes, bloodshot and tired, found hers immediately. He closed the door behind him and staggered forward before collapsing onto his knees. "I'm sorry," he rasped, his voice raw. "I've made so many mistakes." The bag slipped from Evelyn's hands, the crinkle of paper loud in the charged air. She stared at him, her body rigid, torn between fear and fury. Years of silence, of running, of notes filled with threats. He had haunted her life, like a ghost, and now here he was, flesh and blood, crumbling on her floor. "Why are you here?" she demanded, her voice sharp despite the tremor in her chest. Marcus lifted his head, his hands shaking. "I needed to see you, to explain." Evelyn's laugh was bitter, edged with rage. "Explain? You left me in a hospital room with nothing but 3 newborns and a note telling me not to come back. You drained our account. You terrorized me with threats for years, and now you want to explain?" He winced as if her words were blows. I know I was wrong. I was angry, ashamed, but I couldn't carry it anymore. You deserve to know the truth." Her arms folded across her chest, her stance defiant. "Truth? You think there's anything you can say that justifies what you did?" Marcus's eyes glistened. He lowered his gaze, his words tumbling out in halting rhythm. "When the triplets were born, I knew they were mine. I knew it from the start, the color of their skin. It wasn't a mystery. It was me, my blood, my heritage, my mother. She had an affair years before I was born, a black man. She hid it all her life, ashamed, terrified of what people would say. But I knew. I recognized it the moment I saw our children, and instead of facing it, I ran. I used it as an excuse to blame you, to abandon you, to punish you for my shame." Evelyn's breath caught. For a moment the room tilted. Rage flared, burning hotter than it ever had before. "You knew?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "You knew they were yours, and you still left? You let me think I had done something wrong. You let me suffer. You let them suffer." Marcus's hands gripped his knees, his voice cracked. "I was weak. I couldn't bear the truth. I told myself lies, that you had betrayed me, that I was the victim. I lashed out, sent those notes, trying to make you feel the same fear I carried. I thought if I broke you down, I could justify what I had done. Evelyn stepped closer, her anger steady and sharp. You destroyed everything. I raised our children without you. I carried the shame you should have carried. And you think standing here, confessing now, makes a difference? I don't expect forgiveness, Marcus whispered, his eyes wet. I just needed you to know. I wanted a chance to see them, to tell them I love them. Evelyn's whole body shook. Images rushed through her mind. Nights she went hungry so her children could eat. Days when the whispers in Savannah cut her like knives. Hours spent checking locks after finding his threats under her pillow. Every sacrifice, every fear, every tear, all of it had been born from his choice. Her voice was steel. No, you don't get that chance. You lost it the day you walked out. You don't deserve to stand in front of them. You don't deserve to use the word love in their presence. Marcus flinched as though struck. His shoulders sagged, his body folding under the weight of her rejection. He murmured, almost to himself, I just wanted a chance. Evelyn turned her back on him. There are no chances left. For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the muffled sound of her children breathing upstairs. Then, Evelyn walked to the counter, pulled open the drawer where she had kept every note, every photo, every police report. She lifted the folder with steady hand. Dialing the phone, she said, her voice clear and firm, the man who's been threatening me is here tonight. I have everything you need to prove it. Marcus looked up, his face pale, his eyes wide with something between regret and fear. But Evelyn no longer cared. The power had shifted. The years of running, hiding, and fearing had ended. She stood tall in her living room, her children safe upstairs, her mother resting in the next room, and her past crumbling at her feet. She was no longer the woman Marcus had left behind. She was stronger, sharper, unbreakable. The phone call to the police was short and steady. Evelyn Johnson's voice, once trembling in precincts years before, was calm and unshakable now. She gave her name, her address, and told them plainly, the man who has been threatening me for years is in my house. I have the evidence to prove it. She ended the call without another word and slid the folder of notes onto the coffee table, her hand resting on it like a gavel. Marcus sat slumped on the rug, his eyes darting between her and the door as if weighing whether to flee. But his body was too tired, his spirit too eroded by years of shame and regret. He pressed his palms against his knees, muttering, I just needed you to hear me. Evelyn didn't move closer. She stood with her arms crossed, a pillar of strength carved out of years of pain. I heard you, she said, and it changes nothing. You don't get to hurt us and then use confession as a way to wash your hands clean. A knock thundered on the door minutes later, sharp and decisive. Blue lights cut faint streaks through the curtains. Evelyn's heart raced, but she did not falter. She opened the door and stepped aside, allowing two uniformed officers to enter. Their presence filled the room with authority. Marcus looked up at them, his face pale, his hands lifting instinctively. I just came to talk, he stammered. One officer knelt, cuffing his wrists with the efficiency of someone who had done this 100 times. You're under arrest for harassment and violation of protective intent, the officer recited, his tone flat but final. Marcus's eyes flicked toward Evelyn, desperate, pleading for some last mercy. She gave him none. Instead, she retrieved the folder and handed it to the second officer. Inside were years of terror, photos of the notes, dates carefully logged, copies of police reports even, witness statements from neighbors and teachers who had seen the threats slip into her children's world. The officer leafed through it, nodding with grim approval. This is solid, he said. We'll make sure it's all documented. As they pulled Marcus to his feet, he tried once more. Evelyn, please, just let me tell them I love them, just once. His voice cracked, pathetic and hollow. Evelyn stepped forward, her eyes blazing. You don't love them, she snapped. If you did, you would have stayed. You would have protected them instead of tormenting them. You don't get to say that word, not anymore. Marcus's face crumpled. For the first time, he looked like a man stripped of every excuse, every lie, every shield he had once used to protect his pride. The officers let him out, his figure disappearing into the flashing lights, swallowed by the night. The door closed. Silence returned. Evelyn stood motionless, her chest rising and falling as adrenaline began to fade. She felt Ruth's presence before she heard her footsteps. Her mother had been woken by the commotion and now appeared in the hallway, her robe drawn tightly around her shoulders. Is it over? Ruth asked softly. Evelyn nodded. Her voice was low but resolute. It's over. Ruth crossed the room and placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. You did what had to be done. Evelyn exhaled, her eyes wet but her stance firm. I did it for them, for the kids. so they never have to wonder if he'll come back again. Upstairs, the triplets stirred. A floorboard creaked as Jordan peeked down the stairs, his eyes wide and frightened. "Mom?" he whispered. Evelyn turned, her heart breaking at the fear in his face. She climbed halfway up the steps, crouching to meet him. "It's all right, sweetheart," she said, brushing his curls back. "You're safe. He won't hurt us anymore." Layla and Caleb appeared behind their brother, clutching each other's hands. Evelyn gathered all three of them into her arms, holding them tightly against her chest. "You're safe," she repeated, rocking them gently. "You're safe." Later that night, after the children had finally drifted back to sleep, Evelyn sat by the window, looking out at the quiet street. The flashing lights were gone, leaving only the ordinary glow of porch lamps and street lights. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she had to watch the shadows. The threat was gone, taken away in handcuffs, leaving her family free to breathe. Ruth joined her, carrying 2 mugs of tea. They sat in silence for a long while, sipping slowly, the weight of the evening pressing down on them both. At last, Ruth spoke. "You faced him, Evelyn. You faced the worst. That takes more strength than most people ever find." Evelyn stared at the steam rising from her cup. "Strength," she murmured. "I never wanted to be strong. I just wanted us to be whole." "And now you are," Ruth said gently. "Not because of him, in spite of him." Evelyn nodded. She thought of the years she had spent living under Marcus's shadow, always looking over her shoulder, always waiting for the next blow. Tonight, the shadow had been lifted. Tonight, she had stood tall and said no. For the first time in a decade, Evelyn Johnson allowed herself to believe that tomorrow might truly belong to her and her children. The morning after Marcus was taken away, sunlight slipped softly through the blinds. For the first time in years, Evelyn Johnson woke without the knot of dread in her chest. The house was still, but it no longer felt like silence before a storm. It felt like rest. She moved quietly into the kitchen where Ruth was already up, a skillet, warming on the stove, the smell of butter and eggs in the air. Ruth glanced over her shoulder, her eyes steady and knowing. "You slept," she said, more a statement than a question. Evelyn nodded. "I did." She paused, then admitted, "For the first time in a long time, I slept without dreaming of him." Ruth slid a plate onto the counter. "That's how you know it's really over. Peace doesn't come all at once. It comes in little pieces." Last night was one. The triplets shuffled into the kitchen soon after, hair tousled, eyes still heavy with sleep. Jordan carried his sketchbook under his arm as he always did. Layla clutched her notebook of questions, and Caleb marched ahead with the stubbornness of someone ready to take on the day. They sat at the table, eating quietly at first, then breaking into chatter about school projects and playground rivalries. It struck Evelyn how normal it all sounded, how ordinary, how safe. As the days passed, ordinary became their new rhythm. The police called with updates about Marcus's case, confirming that the evidence Evelyn had collected over the years was enough to ensure he would not return. She thanked them, then tucked the phone away, determined not to let his shadow invade her thoughts again. Instead, she focused on the life in front of her. Jordan entered a citywide art contest, and Evelyn beamed with pride as he won 3rd place for his sketch of Charlotte's skyline at dusk. Layla joined the school's science club, coming home each week with experiments that cluttered the kitchen counter and filled the house with laughter and the occasional smell of vinegar. Caleb ran his first official track meet, sprinting with a fire that reminded Evelyn of his determination even as a toddler refusing to nap. At work, Evelyn's promotion settled into routine. She was trusted, respected, and even admired. Mr. Kim often relied on her to train new employees, knowing her patience and clarity turned confusion into confidence. Her binder of instructions, once a personal lifeline, had become the office's most valuable guide. Ruth, though slowing down, continued to anchor the family with her wisdom and warmth. Neighbors often stopped by, just to sit with her on the porch, listening as she told stories of the old Savannah days, stories full of humor and resilience. The triplets adored her, often crowding around her chair in the evenings as she quilted. There, laughter filling the air, she passed down lessons woven into fabric and words alike. When the triplets' 11th birthday arrived, Evelyn planned another celebration. This one was smaller, more intimate, but no less meaningful. Balloons swayed gently in the corners of the living room. A cake sat proudly on the table, and friends gathered to celebrate not just the children's growth, but the family's journey. As the candles flickered, Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment. She remembered the hospital room where she had been left alone, Marcus's cruel note, the terror of the threatening messages, the long nights of fear. And then she remembered the laughter of her children, the strength of her mother, the kindness of neighbors, the triumph of standing her ground. The triplets made their wishes and blew out the candles. Cheers erupted. Evelyn clapped with the rest, but inside she whispered her own wish. Not for survival anymore, but for joy. Later, when the house quieted and the children slept upstairs, Ruth and Evelyn sat together with cups of tea. The wind chimes tinkled softly in the evening breeze. "You've come so far," Ruth said, her eyes full of pride. "You should be proud of yourself." Evelyn smiled, tears brimming. "I am. I think for the first time, I truly am." She looked toward the stairs, where her children slept peacefully, and felt a warmth spread through her chest. The journey had been brutal, marked by betrayal, stigma, and fear. But it had also been marked by resilience, love, and triumph. She had faced every storm, and in the end, she had not just survived. She had built a life worth celebrating. Evelyn Johnson knew one day she would tell her children the full truth about their father, not to burden them, but to show them the strength it took to rise above. But for now, she embraced the peace she had fought for, holding fast to. The laughter, the hope, and the unshakable love that filled their home. Her story was no longer about what was taken from her. It was about what she had built, what she had reclaimed, and what she had become: a mother, a protector, a survivor, a woman who had turned pain into power. And with her children's futures stretching out before them, bright and unbroken, she knew the best chapters were still to come. What do you think of Evelyn's decision to stand firm and protect her children's future? Would you have done the same in her place? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more powerful stories of resilience, love, and triumph.